Notre Dame introduced 7 transfer additions and new defensive line coach Charlie Partridge on Wednesday. In between a homecoming, development plans, and some honest answers, I thought we'd get some real insight into what this team is building. We're breaking it down right here on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer at Fox Sports, and thank you so much for making this your first watch or listen of the day on Thursday, February 19th. Before we get rolling here, make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel or following along on your preferred podcast platform, and don't forget to get your questions in for tomorrow's Friday mailbag. You can drop your questions in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Today's episode is presented by 5 Hour Energy. Have your cake and drink it too. Birthday cake flavor is back, no fork needed. Vanilla-y cakey flavor, caffeinated kick, and no sugar. It's party time. Order now at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. All right, so on Wednesday, we heard from Charlie Partridge in 7 of Notre Dame's transfer portal additions for the first time since they joined the Irish, and I have several takeaways from their introductions. We'll dive into why Charlie Partridge's comments about Chris Ash make me feel like this staff and this defense is in a better place going into 2026, plus why Keon Keeley's return to Notre Dame feels so special and almost poetic. Then we're going to get into the Ohio State receivers and how they gave us real clues about their roles, plus some thoughts on Francis Brewu, Tionne Gray, Jayden Sanders, and of course, the new kicker, Spencer Porath, who has the daunting task of converting a field goal when he suits up in the blue and gold, which would be the first time a Notre Dame kicker has done that since early October of 2025. I'm going to keep bringing that up all offseason in case you were wondering. But the person I want to start out with is not a transfer. It's defensive line coach Charlie Partridge, because I think he gave us the most insight into his unit, his path to Notre Dame, and what his goals and objectives are as the new defensive line coach for the Irish. But one quote about Chris Ash really stood out to me. Here's what he said about Ash. He's extremely driven, as good as anybody I've ever worked with on game day at seeing all 22 moving parts. He's unique that way, so he's a fantastic adjuster. He would later go on to call him a genius in some respects, and he talked a lot about their relationship. I mean, they were teammates when they played college football together at Drake, but that's a really strong endorsement for a guy who's been coaching for a really long time, and he's one of the most respected defensive line coaches in all of college football. But the fact that he showed real respect for Ash's game day mind and his ability to adjust and adapt on the fly just was so important to me, because that is something that Al Golden was so good at. And even though we didn't really see it out of Chris Ash in the first 2 games of the season, there could be many different reasons why, because you need everyone on the staff to be on the same page when you're making those adjustments in the game. And as we saw in that Texas A&M game, when Notre Dame didn't have any answer for what Colin Klein and the Texas A&M offense were doing to them, it made me think that Ash was a guy without answers. But now that he's surrounded by guys who he's familiar with, who he's comfortable with, and they're also good coaches, I feel like they're going to be in a much better position from a communication standpoint on the sidelines. And when you have a guy like Charlie Partridge, who's so well respected, and he's looking up to Chris Ash, and he decided to leave the NFL where he had a good situation with the Colts to come back to the college game, it tells you a lot, because there's not a whole lot of guys leaving the NFL to come back to college on their own accord. There's a lot of people, as we saw this offseason with Al Washington, Mike Mickens, leaving college to go to the NFL. But moves from the NFL back to college are usually reserved for guys who aren't in such good standing. But that's not the case with Charlie Partridge. And he also talked about how much college football has changed in the short amount of time that he's been gone. He was only with the Colts for 2 years, so it's not like he was completely absent from the transfer portal and the NIL era, but still, it's changed a lot in the past 2 years, and it's going to continue to change for the next several years going forward. But Charlie Partridge got into his timeline from the time that he actually finished the season with the Colts, finished packing his bags, made his way up to South Bend, and as soon as he got with the staff, the first priority for him was scouting and then communicating with their transfer portal prospects. The personnel department, who Charlie Partridge gave a ton of credit to, gave him the guys that they were looking at heavily, and it was Brewu, Gray, and Keon Keeley, and they ended up landing all 3 of them. So he gets back in the college game, and it's almost fitting that the first thing he has to do is try to encourage other guys in the transfer portal to come to Notre Dame. But fortunately for Partridge, one of those guys was Francis Brewu, a player that he recruited when he was the defensive line coach at Pittsburgh, but was actually never able to coach him because once Francis Brewu actually got on campus, that's when Partridge ended up taking the job with the Indianapolis Colts. But now, as fate would have it, Francis Brewu is back with Notre Dame, and Brewu talked to the media today, and he said point blank that Charlie Partridge is the reason he's at Notre Dame. He also called him the best defensive line coach in the country, and now he gets to play for Charlie Partridge, and it feels like unfinished business for both of these guys, and the fact that they were here together, I think you're going to get the most out of Francis Brewu in that respect, especially when you consider how much Charlie Partridge just loves teaching technique. He told Pete Sampson that's why he does it. He loves getting into the really finer details about defensive line play and then seeing the techniques and everything that he's teaching these guys actually have a big impact on their game. Like, that's why he does it. And I think he's going to have an even bigger and better opportunity to do that with college guys because they're not grown men. They're not considered finished products. And even those guys have a lot of developing to do in the NFL. It's just not it's not quite the same as going into college and then seeing an 18-year-old and then developing him into a really good defensive lineman. And that's what he can do with Brewu because Brewu still has a few years left of eligibility. And the fact that Notre Dame was able to get him was huge because it was a big need. And I thought it was really interesting when Francis Brewu talked about the impact that game when he faced Notre Dame had on his decision to come to Notre Dame because as we all remember, College Game Day was at Pittsburgh for that game. It was one of their biggest home games in years. And then Notre Dame kind of ran him off the field. Like, that game was over after Tay Johnson had that pick six early on in the game, and the Notre Dame faithful who were in attendance were loud, and they made their presence felt. And Francis Brewu admitted that he took notice of that and how there were so many Notre Dame fans in the crowd and how they were so lively and so loud throughout that game. And he thought that's a crowd and that's a fan base that really appreciates their team and their program, and Brewu wanted to be a part of something like that. He also mentioned how the way he phrased it was like every school in the country was calling him, which was a big change from when he was a high school recruit, when he was only getting looked at by a few of the top schools. But he said, and he wasn't even like bragging about it. He was just being very matter of fact saying, yeah, like the recruiting experience when you're a transfer portal guy and you've actually proven yourself a little bit is much different than when you're in high school, because he said he was getting calls nonstop, figured out who he was going to visit, went to Ohio State, visited Notre Dame, also visited Tennessee, but ultimately ended up with the Irish. And I think, as he said, one of the biggest reasons why was Charlie Partridge. Francis Brewu is not the biggest guy. Partridge even admitted he's a little bit undersized in terms of his height, but he is so freakishly strong. Like, we knew that. We saw his name in Bruce Feldman's freaks list. We saw some of the stats that he was throwing around in the weight room. But man, when you actually see him and you see his triceps bursting out of his sleeves, you're like, oh yeah, that dude is big. Speaking of a big dude, we also got to meet defensive tackle Tionne Gray, the Oregon transfer, and that is just a massive human. But he's actually not quite as big as he's listed. Gray said that he's 325 pounds right now. I think last year when he was at Oregon, he was over 340, and then he was down to 333 on the press release, the roster that Notre Dame put out recently, but now he's down to 325, and he said he's trying to get down to 315, and Partridge was pretty, point blank with him, saying you got to get down lower, you got to get to a lower weight because you're more likely to get injured when you're heavier, and you can still be fast and strong if you're at 315. So I think that's what he's working on right now. But either way, he's still 6'6". He's a massive dude, and I think he's going to be great for this Notre Dame defensive line. And it didn't sound like Gray left Oregon on bad terms. He said that he wanted to be at a place with a great culture similar to Oregon and what Dan Lanning has built over there, and he was really not surprised by what Notre Dame has in the locker room, but I think he just really appreciates being able to transfer into an environment where, the players are welcoming, and he knows he's going into a place where like guys aren't just looking out for themselves, and he's not going to be alienated just because of a transfer. And he also has some familiarity in the locker room in terms of other guys from his hometown. Tionne Gray is from St. Louis, and he mentioned how he's gravitating towards some of the other St. Louis guys like Aeneas Williams, like Christian Gray, and Jeremiah Love as well, even though he's off to the NFL. So I think that regional connection clearly meant something to him because even though St. Louis isn't the closest to South Bend, it's about a 6-hour drive. I've done it before, but being able to be a little bit closer to home, to be closer to family, to be a drive away as opposed to a flight across the country. I think that all matters to him. And he just came across as someone who's humble and looking for stability in a defined role and a chance to get on the field and play because, he was a good player at Oregon, but he was behind two future NFL guys. Now he has an opportunity at Notre Dame to really make a name for himself from the moment this season starts against Wisconsin in Lambeau Field. So I thought it was really interesting to hear from Charlie Partridge and then to hear from the two biggest additions that he got in the transfer portal. It just felt fitting, and it was great to hear from those guys. So Charlie Partridge clearly had a plan when he got here, but wait until you hear what Keon Keeley said about coming back to Notre Dame, because that story might define this entire transfer portal class. More on that right after this.
I'm Clea Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. It was a heavyweight showdown between number 3 South Carolina and number 7 LSU, and the Gamecocks rose to the occasion. South Carolina secured a hard-fought 79-72 victory to stay atop the SEC standings, using a balanced offensive attack to outlast the Tigers. Tessa Johnson led the way with 21 points, while Raven Johnson added 19. Medina Okot dominated the paint with a double-double, finishing with 12 points and 17 rebounds, while Joyce Edwards chipped in 10 points to round out the scoring. With the statement win, the Gamecocks now turn their attention to a road matchup at number 23 Alabama on Thursday. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the finals. Before the season, I told you, I picked the Nuggets to win the NBA Finals. It's going to be tough to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, but I think they can do it, and they're plus 550 right now on FanDuel. And if they can get by the Thunder in the West, I think the Nuggets are going to bring home another NBA Finals trophy. So just visit FanDuel.com to get started and use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Irish. Today, we are reacting to the introductory press conferences for Notre Dame's new transfer portal additions, as well as defensive line coach Charlie Partridge. But before we get back to the press conferences, I did want to remind you that you can get Locked On Irish ad-free with the Everydayer Club. Plus, you'll get access to the members-only Discord channel. Check it out at lockedonirish.supercast.com. Now let's talk about Keon Keeley, because this is a name that Notre Dame fans are very familiar with. Keeley was committed to Notre Dame for a long time when he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Then he flipped to play for Nick Saban in Alabama, and he was there for 3 years. But now he has returned home to Notre Dame. And I don't use that term lightly, because even though Keon Keeley is from Florida, Notre Dame is home to him. And I think you could see that in his expressions and just hear it in his voice. He is so happy to be back at Notre Dame. And I think he'd even admit this is the place where he always wanted to be and was meant to be. This quote in particular stood out. I kind of knew when I stepped on campus that I was going to go to Notre Dame. It was a really easy decision to choose Notre Dame. Once Keon Keeley entered the transfer portal, Notre Dame was obviously thrown around as a potential contender, but I didn't know if Notre Dame was going to be willing to pursue him, and I didn't know if maybe the ship had sailed for Keon Keeley in Notre Dame. I had actually heard in the past, obviously not this most recent offseason, but an offseason prior to this one, there may have been some dialogue between Keon Keeley and Notre Dame about a potential return. I believe that Keeley initiated that, but the timing just wasn't really right for Notre Dame. I mean, they had a bunch of veteran defensive linemen and specifically defensive ends. So now the timing is working out for both parties. Notre Dame needed help on the defensive end position. Keon Keeley wanted to be back at a place like Notre Dame, a place where he's comfortable, a place where he could thrive on the football field. And now They are back together, and it's just beautiful. It's a great sight to see, especially when you hear Keon Keeley said that he was tearing up when he stepped on the field with his mom for the first time since he was a recruit, and he was with Coach Al Washington, who is now with the Miami Dolphins. But they were playing the Rudy theme music when he was out in the field, and he said that it made him tear up a little bit. I did get a little kick out of the fact he was like, well, I'm a man, but I did tear up a little bit. I have to admit it. I just thought it was funny that he had to clarify, as if like tearing up when you return home to the place you always felt like you wanted to be at made you any less manly. But he just seemed so happy, and I'm happy for him because, his college career just hasn't panned out like he had hoped, or many other people around him had probably expected. When you are not only a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, he was the number 2 overall recruit in his class. Like typically, if you're the number 2 overall recruit, you're probably in the NFL draft after your third year in college. Instead, Keon Keeley is transferring from Alabama to Notre Dame because he hasn't even, come anywhere close to living up to that kind of potential. But I do believe now that he's in a place where he's comfortable with, and he's going to have Charlie Partridge coaching him every single day, I think he has a chance to thrive in what could be his last year at Notre Dame, although he has 2 years left of eligibility. But I'll admit, I've been a little bit skeptical, or I guess I should say not skeptical, but I'm hesitant to say, oh, well, now that Keon Keeley is back at a place like Notre Dame, a place where he wanted to be, that means he's just automatically going to become the former 5-star and live up to all that potential that he had coming out of high school, because I need to see it to believe it. And I still think that's true. But when you see just how excited he is to be back and be very candid about, what didn't work out at Alabama. He wasn't negative about any of his coaches or any of his former teammates or anything like that. But he talked about how he had to put on a lot of weight to play, a couple different positions at Alabama, and he wasn't able to move around in the same way that he did out of high school. And he also mentioned how he's trying to slim down plenty at Notre Dame, and he even laughed at the fact that a lot of people have been asking him about his weight. But he said that it's something that was mutually understood, that he could slim down to, be himself physically and be the best player he can be in that body type. He is going to be a defensive end. He's not going to move to the interior. I believe some people were asking about that just because of Notre Dame's lack of depth at the position, but then they added Brewu and Tionne Gray, so I think they're good there. So overall, I just thought Keon Keeley came off very self-aware. The staff has a plan for him, and he just looks comfortable, and I just think that this really could be a huge opportunity for Keon Keeley to maximize his ability and become the player we all thought he could be back when he was committed out of high school. Another player who has 5-star potential, 2 players, I should say, wide receivers Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter from Ohio State. Mylan Graham's comments went viral on social media on Wednesday, if you are not chronically online like some of us. But basically, Mylan Graham was asked, what is the biggest difference between Notre Dame and Ohio State, his former school? And he said, class. And then he elaborated, you actually have to go to class at Notre Dame as opposed to Ohio State. Now, some people took that to believe that you don't have to do any schoolwork at Ohio State. I don't think that's true, even if you're a football player. I think he was just being very matter-of-fact and saying, like, at Notre Dame, you have to attend class in person. They don't allow online classes. Where at Ohio State, especially if you're an athlete, you're going to be allowed to take online classes. And I remember when Joe Burrow was at LSU, he said that he never went to a class during his entire time there, but that's what makes Notre Dame different. Is it a challenge when they're trying to recruit 5-star players out of high school? Absolutely. When so many other schools around the country allow all their players to basically live in that football student-athlete bubble where the only place they're going is the facility and then back to their apartment or the house that they're living at, and they only hang out with athletes. They have no interaction with the regular students at that school because they're not in class and they're not eating in the dining hall or anything like that. Notre Dame is different. And part of what makes Notre Dame different is also what makes it great. And I think Mylan Graham was pretty open and honest. And, when Notre Dame was recruiting him out of the transfer portal, academics were concerned. We didn't know how that would translate, but Mylan Graham seems pretty self-aware about everything. He understands the commitment that he has to make to the classroom in order to succeed as a football player because he's got to stay eligible. But he's a very confident guy. And, if you're going to be a successful wide receiver, you have to be very confident. You almost have to be delusional if we're being completely honest. But I think the most interesting thing he said from a football standpoint is that his number one goal this offseason is to bulk up and become as strong as possible so he can come down with more contested catches. And I think that's intentional development because, let's be honest, Notre Dame has a need at the boundary wide receiver position. I don't think that Mylan Graham is going to play boundary wide receiver. He doesn't really have that body type. But if he can become one of the better contested catch guys on this team, that's going to increase his value, and that is going to get him on the field sooner because we already know Notre Dame has an extremely talented field receiver in Jordan Faison who's extremely fast, extremely elusive, great route runner, and Mylan Graham has a lot of those same qualities. So how can he separate himself so that he can get out on the field? He can come bigger, stronger, faster, more physical, come down with more contested catches. So that part really stood out to me. And Notre Dame is going to get pretty creative in how they use these wide receivers this year because, it's not just like, all right, you have a clear Malachi Fields, he's going to be the boundary. And then last year, you had Jordan Faison at field and then Will Pauling at slot. They all fit like the prototypes for each position. It's a little bit different this year, but when you have so many guys with this amount of talent like a Mylan Graham and they can just get on the field, you're going to figure out a way to maximize them. And I'm sure Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown are really excited about Mylan Graham's potential. I'm sure they're also excited about Quincy Porter's potential, but there are some concerns about his injury. And I thought that compared to Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter was very coy in his responses, and it was intentional. I think he was just trying to be not secretive, just not give anything away about his injury. He said that everything has been progressing well. He didn't give a timeline about his return, which I understand. I'm sure he was probably coached on that as well. But there just haven't been a whole lot of answers about the knee injury he had when he was with Ohio State. It held him out for the end of the season. He did appear in 4 games, although he even admitted he's not sure if he was able to preserve his redshirt year because he appeared in 4 games on offense, but then also had a special teams appearance in another game. If he sues the NCAA, I'm sure he'll get granted that extra year of eligibility. But hopefully, Quincy Porter is so good that he doesn't need 5 years in college football because he is 6'4". He is just under 200 pounds, and he does bring things to the table that no other wide receiver in that room has. So if Quincy Porter can just get healthy, he's got a great chance to have a huge career at Notre Dame. But I think we're all just kind of in wait-and-see mode. At this point in time, on February 19th, I don't expect Quincy Porter to be a participant in Notre Dame spring practice, certainly not a full participant. Maybe he can get out there and do some drills in t-shirt and shorts, but I'm not expecting him to really go out there and be in pads or anything like that with the wide receivers, which is unfortunate because if he were healthy, he would be one of the players I was most excited to watch this spring. So it wasn't a shock that he was a little bit shy in his answers. He's quieter than Mylan Graham, but still, I think that when you look at what those two guys have and what the talent that they possess here, it was such a great addition for Notre Dame to get those guys. And Quincy Porter was probably the most honest about CJ Carr and the influence and impact that he had on his decision because he admitted to watching Notre Dame football before just as a fan and seeing CJ Carr. And from the time that he got on campus, CJ Carr was one of the first people that he hung out with, and he wanted to establish that relationship early on because clearly Quincy Porter, Mylan Graham, all these guys recognize that CJ Carr has a chance to be one of, if not the best quarterback in college football next season. And that's a business decision. If you're catching balls from CJ Carr, your stats are going to improve and you're going to have a better chance to get drafted higher in the NFL. So even though Quincy Porter didn't say a lot, I still believe that what he said was pretty revealing. All right, so we've talked defensive line and wide receivers, but the secondary got a lot more interesting with the addition of Jayden Sanders, and one quote in particular really stood out. That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Today's episode is presented by 5 Hour Energy. Welcome to the 5 Hour Energy Flavor Draft. We're looking at every aspect of the draft to let you know which tasty flavors are the best and which just might be sleepers. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one is going to take the top spot. Now here's the thing, 5 Hour Energy has a wide variety of flavors, so there really is something for everyone. Whether you like bold fruit, smooth and balanced, or bright and punchy, this lineup runs deep. And with the first pick, I'm drafting Berry. Big, bold, mixed berry flavor with notes of raspberry and blackberry, a little tartness to keep it balanced, and a clean finish with minimal aftertaste. It's smooth, easy to recognize, and just flat out dependable. That's my number one overall pick. But don't sleep on cherry. Bold red fruit flavor, sweet with a light tart edge, bright and punchy from start to finish. It's smooth, easy drinking, and always delivers. That's a strong second round steal. And my sleeper, I got my eye on Confetti Craze. That rich, freshly baked cake vibe with smooth vanilla frosting notes sounds like a wild card that could shoot up draft boards fast. Find your new favorite flavor of 5 Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. Welcome back to Locked On Irish. Today, we are reacting to all the introductory press conferences for the new transfer portal editions. And the next guy I want to talk about is cornerback Jayden Sanders, the transfer from Michigan. I think Sanders, in his decision to come to Notre Dame, took a lot of people by surprise, myself included, because I didn't really see cornerback as a big position of need for Notre Dame. And the fact that they were able to go out and get Jayden Sanders, a guy who appeared in all 13 games, his true freshman season at Michigan, including 2 starts, was a surprise, but it was a welcome surprise because he's a very talented player. And he's a very polite person. I noticed that when he was communicating with the media, he would literally turn his whole body to the person who was asking the question. He would respond while looking at them directly, and then he would move on. It was just a subtle thing that I noticed, but he just seems like he understands what Notre Dame is about. He made a funny point that the first time he got into the locker room, the other players told him that it's pretty rare for Notre Dame to accept undergraduate transfers. He didn't know that was the case, but he seems to be acclimating to the defensive backfield well, his teammates in the secondary, and also, the rest of the locker room at large. But as he was talking about his role, there's one quote that really stood out to me when he was asked about, all the competition, the fact that there are so many good players in that secondary. He said, quote, "I feel like they," the Notre Dame coaching staff, "made it obvious that I was going to have to compete for a spot, which is what I like and I don't have a problem with doing." I think that's exactly what you want to hear, the fact that he's embracing competition. He would not be at Notre Dame if he wasn't willing to embrace competition, because there is no way that Mike Mickens, the coach who recruited him to come to Notre Dame, was going to guarantee him a spot when they already have Leonard Moore and they already have Christian Gray. And then they got the young guys coming up like Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary. So the fact that Jayden Sanders saw an opportunity at Notre Dame where he really is not guaranteed anything other than some NIL money, it says a lot about who he is as a player. So I'm not surprised that he spoke about his competitiveness and how he's just here to compete every single day. He had a great quote at the end, though, about how he's trying to get an interception because he did not get one his freshman year. Again, got to love that mindset out of a defensive back. But he was asked about which position he intends to play at Notre Dame. And he said, quote, "I'm just now getting into that. It's a new coach and seeing what he wants, what he thinks is better." But he was asked specifically about boundary or field corner. He did not talk about nickel. Maybe he'll get some run at nickel. Maybe he won't. At Michigan, he barely ever played in the box. But as we've talked about plenty on this show, Notre Dame has an opening at nickel now that Devontae Smith is off to the NFL. They're probably going to try a bunch of different players there. But the fact that Jayden Sanders is open to playing any of those 3 positions is certainly going to help him get on the field. Next up, and the last player we're going to talk about today, is the kicker, Spencer Porath, the Purdue transfer. The one thing that I really liked about Spencer Porath is he talked like a robot, which is good. I want the kicker to be robotic. I don't want him to feel emotions. I don't want the kicker to experience joy. I don't want them to experience nerves. I don't want them to experience sadness. I don't want them to experience anything. You know why? Because that will make them a better kicker. Now, obviously, I'm joking to some degree here, but he was very just direct in his responses, didn't really show much emotion, but he did open up a little bit when he was asked about being a kid from Indiana and now having the opportunity to play at Notre Dame and how much it meant to him because he had grown up his entire life hearing about the tradition at Notre Dame and everything that the football program has to offer. And then he spent his first couple years at Purdue, so he wasn't far from home. And now he just made the trip north, up 31, and now he's at Notre Dame, and he has a great chance to be the starter from day one. He was also asked about, how he's going to handle pressure-packed moments, because I think we can all admit that when he was the kicker at Purdue, he wasn't playing in a lot of high-stakes games, but that is hopefully not going to be the case when he's with Notre Dame. Hopefully he has many opportunities to go out there and kick in a big moment, in a big game. And he said that the number one thing there is just being consistent and treating every single rep the same, not focusing on the situation, just focus on the fact that you're going to be asked to do something that you have already done a million times. And it's not just him. He's talked about working with the holder and the snapper and getting in as many reps as possible, hearing what Coach Marty Biagi had to say, because Spencer Porath really appreciated that Marty Biagi was a former kicker himself, so they can kind of bounce ideas off one another about technique, routine, repetition, and he just has a very process-oriented mindset, and I really like that because I think that's exactly what you need as a kicker. The one transfer who was not there was DJ McKinney, the cornerback transfer from Colorado. He is still not on campus with Notre Dame. He's finishing school over at Boulder, and that's a bummer that we haven't been able to hear from him yet. I'm sure we're going to hear from him in the summer or around training camp, because he is one of the most interesting transfers out of this entire class, because he has a ton of experience. He's a veteran, right? He's one of the only grad transfers they brought in, but we don't know if he's going to play field corner or if he's going to play nickel, if he's going to be a backup. So what his role is going to be is a big question mark for the secondary and really the entire Notre Dame defense this offseason. So it's unfortunate that we didn't get a chance to meet him. There's a lot of intrigue around him and where he's going to line up and his path to Notre Dame, because if you remember, there was that tweet, that report that came out from On3 that he was going to be the first player committed to Notre Dame in the transfer portal, but then they went back and they rescinded that, only for him to commit officially a few days later. So we'll get our opportunity to hear from DJ McKinney, but overall, hearing from all these guys, hearing from all the new transfer portal additions, it's hard not to get excited about them as people and what they bring to this team, not just this year, but potentially several years, because a lot of these guys have several years left of eligibility remaining. All right. That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you're watching along on YouTube, remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, or if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please just make sure you're following the show and maybe even leave a rating and drop a review. It really helps us out. And don't forget to submit your questions for tomorrow's Friday mailbag. You can leave yours in the YouTube comments, send them on X at Locked On Irish, or hit us up in the DMs on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonirish.supercast.com to join the club. I'll see you Friday.